All right, so thank you everyone for having us. We are the Esports Education Playbook team, and the title of our book was Esports Education Playbook, Empowering Every Learner Through Inclusive Gaming. It took the four of us a while, but I think, Steve, is it fair to say we all know the name of the book now? We're all
I never can be sure.
Questionable.
You know what? The last couple of times I did go back and check. For some reason, I keep thinking it's empowering all learners, but okay.
So you'll notice a bunch of logos on the screen besides the conference. We'll talk a little bit about who we are. Chris and Steve, do you want to introduce yourselves first?
Sure, happy to. My name is Chris Aviles. I am a teacher here in New Jersey. I teach entrepreneurship, innovation, and design thinking to 4th through 8th graders. I'm also the co-founder, along with Steve, of Garden State Esports, which is a nonprofit he and I started to help other schools in New Jersey and beyond start esports teams so everybody can enjoy the benefits of having a scholastic esports team. And I wrote The Thing with the team.
The Thing. So, and my name's Steve Isaacs, and seeing my new title there is kind of interesting. I've been a teacher for 28 years. I've taught game design and development for a large part of that in Basking Ridge, New Jersey, at a middle and high school. And just last week, I left my post teaching and joined Epic Games as their education program manager, which I'm super excited about. Really great opportunities to amplify and leverage some great technologies in the classroom. So if that's of interest to you, I definitely want to bring a lot of educators along the ride with me. And as Chris said, we co-founded Garden State Esports. You'll hear a little more about both of our stories as how we got there. And yeah, I also was a contributing author to The Thing that Chris was talking about.
So I'm Christine Lyon-Bailey. I'm also in New Jersey. So I'm an elementary school principal and a director of technology and innovation up in North Jersey. And I am also one of the founders and chief strategy officer of Ready Learner One. So Jesse, myself, and one other colleague founded our company and started writing some books together. So I have a book out called Reality Bites, which I co-authored with Jesse and Micah Shippey. And then I'm also a co-author of The Thing, which would be the Esports Education Playbook, Empowering Every Learner Through Inclusive Gaming. I'm pretty sure they call it The Thing because nobody can remember the whole title. Yeah, and I'm not a gamer, but we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But I'm really excited to be here today with all of you.
And lastly, I'm Jesse Lubinsky. I'm the Chief Learning Officer for Ready Learner One, which I founded with Christine. And as Christine mentioned, we co-authored Reality Bites, Innovative Learning Using Augmented and Virtual Reality, as well as The Thing with Steve and Chris. I am proud to say I am not from New Jersey. So I'm the only one. I'm from New York, which isn't much better. And if you're from California, you're laughing at all of us anyway, because we're like buried underneath like 8 feet of snow. So yeah.
But we still made it to the session today.
So one of the most interesting things about The Thing, the book, was really how the book came together and kind of how we all found our way into the esports realm from a bunch of different avenues. Christine already mentioned she's not a gamer. As you'll kind of hear and we talk about in the book, we've all followed these different trajectories and paths through our careers to find ourselves in this really unique place and at this unique time to bring esports to the masses. And in particular today, we really want to focus on, the aspects of what is talked about as digital sportsmanship and, the aspects of social emotional learning and digital citizenship that we know bring benefits to our students. So with that, Chris, why don't you start off with your journey?
Yeah. So esports has actually always kind of been an interesting part of my life. My father was in the military when I was younger, and when he got out, he got a job at AT&T. And he was driving trucks for a while, and they asked him if he wanted to go back to school to learn how to fix computers. So he took them up on that opportunity, went back to night school. And the way that he and I bonded when I was little, were building computers together, doing his homework together. So I started building my computers, when I was 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. And I remember playing video games with him after we would build the computer was always my favorite part. And so I always have been into gaming, got my first Nintendo. And it's always stayed a part of my life. In 1998, in eighth grade, I started playing competitive StarCraft. Not that I was any good, but it was something popular in and around our town. And so, it's always been something that I kept up. I played in college competitively. I try to play even now competitively. But I remember when I started teaching, so like 2006, um, I had all these kids. I taught the lowest level English class. They used to call my class Fight Club. And the way I built relationships with my students was through talking about video games. So you fast forward another 5 years, 2011, I went down to Atlantic City to see my first ever actual big time esports tournament. And I was absolutely blown away at the level of production that went into playing video games. They had casters and jumbotrons and fireworks, and fans were chanting, and it was nuts. And it made me think, right? Because I've also coached football, wrestling, and track most of my life, and I was the varsity football, wrestling, and track coach at the high school where I was. How many students that I taught that would love to be involved in something like this, but didn't have an interest in traditional athletics? And so since 2011, I had been trying to get it into New Jersey, and for a lot of different reasons, it wasn't working out. I changed districts in 2018. And one of the reasons I changed districts is they saw the vision for esports at their school. So 2018, I started the first middle school esports team in the country. And my next phone call was to Steve. He started the second middle school esports team in the country, and we played each other. And since then, we have seen the value and just the way that our kids have flourished by being part of something. In March, after COVID hit, a lot less responsibilities, but we were also getting a lot of questions in New Jersey, and beyond about how we start esports teams. So Steve and I teamed up with NASIF, which we'll mention later, and we founded Garden State Esports, which is a nonprofit in New Jersey, like I said, to help New Jersey and everybody start an esports team. So that's kind of how I got to where I am.
Steve, how about you?
Hey, everybody. So, there are a lot of similarities in mine and Chris's story, but certainly, some differences as well. I also, gaming and all that was in my blood from as long as I could remember. My brother spent his bar mitzvah money on an Atari 2600, and that was like one of the greatest days of our collective lives, where we started playing, the Atari and buying cartridges and rushing home to throw them in. And soon thereafter, I got an Apple II Plus computer, and this was in the days when, not everybody had a computer. So that was like my passion, without a doubt. Fortunately, I'd say, my parents seem to encourage that, because I often, run into that question about, what level of support, parents should give kids in that regard. And luckily I've grown up following my passion and believe strongly in that. So kind of thank my parents for that. But yeah, so I, was, big into that kind of stuff. Then even in college, one of our, one of the things we did a lot of was we played a lot of Tecmo Bowl. My living room of our apartment became the Tecmo Bowl arena. I often say, much to the dismay of one of my roommates who despised video games and really didn't want people gathering in our room necessarily. And we were all in there just having a great time, playing Tecmo Bowl. I think he's gotten over it by now, but it was a point of contention at times. But then, so I actually started teaching, though. I was teaching special education in a science and technology magnet school. And there, I started to see the benefits of basically technology, to serve the kids that I was teaching, and also to personalize learning. And that's where games started to come in too, because especially at that time with some of the educational games, it was clear that this was a path for my students to be able to work at their own pace and all sorts of interesting things like that, which actually led us to opening a computer training center in the small town where I ended, teaching for the last 20 or so years. And we were doing like summer computer camps, after school programs, and then by you know, by luck, the evenings. So we started, you know, it was the days when the internet cafe was somewhat of a fashionable thing. So we thought we would open on the weekends as an internet cafe. And I kind of joke because what would happen is every Friday and Saturday night, my wife and I would sit and sip coffee and surf the internet, and we would barely ever get a customer. And then we ended up sort of opening up those evening hours to kids who initially were making up time for classes they missed, and it started becoming a social kind of thing. And then we started playing games, and you know, a kid introduced me to multiplayer gaming, like the fact that you could play Warcraft 2 on a local area network was you know, a defining moment in my life, when all of a sudden we were like, you know, on different computers playing each other. Like that just, you know, this light bulb went off. And so we continued with this idea of multiplayer gaming and created this amazing space purely by accident that became like this safe place for these kids who wanted something to do socially, you know, that was a shared interest. And it became abundantly clear that this was a thing, you know, this was really something to, you know, to grab onto. And what was interesting too is you know, we had like a network, so that made that possible. And you know, at the time, you know, internet connections at home weren't fast, you know, so it was initially, the thought was, well, maybe this was a thing now because it provided that opportunity. But that idea of social gaming didn't go away at all. So some kids do it from home with the faster internet, but they still like to be together in the same space playing games. And that's that you know, really kind of clued me into what was possible. Then, you know, I mean, and that was like 20 years before, or 10, 15 years before Chris and I started with esports in school, but the writing was on the wall. And then, you know, I started a casual gaming club, and we always bring that up when we talk because Chris and I had very different initial visions of what we thought, how we thought to start. Chris was very much into like, let me start a team like a traditional sports team, which is completely valid. And my feeling initially, because we were doing these pay to play clubs after school, was let me create something that would bring anybody interested into the space. And so we started out very casually, but with the idea that we would also seek opportunities to get into competitive gaming. And that laid a little bit dormant until that phone call from Chris, where he said, hey, you know, I have a Rocket League team. Can you put together a Rocket League team to play us? And that's when I finally really asked the kids, like, hey, we have this opportunity. Who's interested? And that's when some eyes lit up and we got interest in this different level. And it became amazing playing competitively in that environment. And we started, and Chris was great. He brought in Topher James, who, you know, a good friend of ours and esports, who is a great Rocket League player, but also a shoutcaster. And he was shoutcasting our initial matches. So now we created that opportunity to have people at home, you know, parents and grandparents and everybody watch online. And then Topher went a step further and you know, and was willing to mentor some of our kids. So our kids started getting into that. And that's kind of part that you'll hear more of, is that these other opportunities, like there were some kids that were not necessarily the star players, but now had an opportunity to get behind a microphone and call the game, and did great with that, and then start doing video editing around that. So it's really neat to see, you know, where that all went to and such. And you know, and that was the start of something, you know, pretty great. And, you know, like Chris said, that led us to getting more and more involved with NASEF and with other schools. And, you know, and especially I think one of the things unique about Chris and I also is that we were both middle school teachers. So we were passionate about getting middle school kids involved because, you know, it all started kind of with college. College gave us the opportunity to reach down to high school because there were these scholarship opportunities, but we knew we needed to build this whole pipeline, you know, throughout. So that's kind of what got us, you know, real excited and charged. And, you know, and now they're a lot of middle schools and high schools, you know, and elementary schools getting involved.
Christine?
So I'm not a gamer. In fact, when we were writing this book, there were many conversations where I had no idea what they were all talking about. But you know, if I'm going to be totally transparent, my last game that I played was probably Duck Hunt on an original Nintendo. I'm a pretty good shot, for the record. And I still have my original Nintendo, where if I bang the top of the machine enough times, I can play the game still with my now 9-year-old daughter, who doesn't quite appreciate the imagery, but that's okay. But I got involved in this project because I have an intense passion for helping kids find their sense of belonging. It's kind of been my mission, you know, from the beginning, as it is for most educators. I was a softball, volleyball, basketball athlete my entire life. Played varsity sports, played in college, coached. And the most important component of my childhood, and the thing that had the biggest impact on me as a human, was my team and my coach, and that sense of community that I had with those people, and having pride in my performance, and being celebrated with my peers. And that had a huge impact on me. And then in the classroom, I coached those same sports, but there were so many students that didn't have that opportunity to have that sense of belonging. And those were the kids that we could reach with a program like esports. And we didn't have it back then. It wasn't a thing. It should have been, but it wasn't. So as I transitioned into my administrative role in my district now, Steve and I had met years ago. New Jersey's a pretty small state, in case you didn't know. And he had really kept me in the loop with what was going on in terms of, you know, the sort of the evolution of esports in schools. And I always thought it was absolutely amazing. And so Steve really inspired my perspective on esports and the necessity for it. And then I became the advocate for it in my school district. And I really went to bat to create a program for our students in a community that was at first strongly opposed, because they saw video games as a negative thing. And they saw them as fostering violence and recluse children who weren't socializing. And so it became my mission to really change that perspective, because the more we perpetuated that, the more we lost those children. And so we wanted to make sure that we weren't doing that in the community. And so that was really what brought me to the team. It was certainly not my knowledge of gaming systems or anything related to the technical side of esports, but more that sense of belonging and replicating for our esports athletes what was provided to me through my own childhood experiences, and hoping that every child finds that experience for themselves, regardless of what it looks like.
So I was a gamer. You know, I had Nintendo, I had Genesis, I'd been playing games my whole life. But when Christine and I co-founded Ready Learner One, after a nearly 2-decade career for me in both the classroom and as a school administrator, our focus was really on how do we help schools adopt technology in a more efficient way and on a faster timeline. I'm sure you know, whenever there's something new that comes down the pipe, whether it's AR, VR, or esports, there's always like the early adopters, and then, you know, you hear about it more a little bit over the years, and then it really comes into play later. And esports and AR and VR, augmented virtual reality, were things that we were super passionate about when we formed the company. We released Reality Bites, and then as we were looking into esports, we wanted to partner with practitioners who were still in the classroom and really doing this. And we knew, you know, Chris and Steve from the conference circuit, and they were working on almost like a parallel project. And what's great is when we kind of took a look at what they were working on and talked about our perspective and where we were coming from, it really touched on all areas of the school community, both from Christine and I, our experience as administrators, to Chris and Steve's expertise as practitioners. And so the interesting thing about not just this presentation, but about the book, is we don't even get into the gaming itself until the end of the book, because esports is not about, I know it's very easy as a teacher or as someone who's, you know, thinking about bringing something into a school to want to dive into the details. And the truth is, with esports, we feel like the conversation has to happen at a higher level first and really provide an understanding of why esports is important, why, if you're not doing it, you're almost behind in many ways. And so that's what we really want to spend a lot of our time talking about during the session, is not the which game to pick and some of the nitty gritty details, because we cover that in the book and we can talk about that. But ultimately, we have to have that broader conversation of why. And so with that, I'm going to kick it over to Steve to get us going on a conversation on the why of esports. You muted.
I still want a shirt that says you're muted. So esports. So at the, on the surface, it's competitive multiplayer gaming. Obviously that's a big component, but as Jesse said, that's not the whole thing by any means. When it comes to the competitive part, there are team-based opportunities, there's individual competition, but there's so much more. In terms of the reflexive and strategic, of course, we're talking also about skills and eye-hand coordination and all that. But the so much more is, I think, what's so compelling. And it's good to look at a little bit about what the industry is all about, which I love because I was teaching game design and development, right? So it was a great selling point for parents to talk about, hey, we're talking industry here, we're talking big business and things, right? So the amount of viewers for esport events is tremendous. In fact, one of the stats we'd like to share is that over the last couple of years, the League of Legends World Championships, first, one of the big milestones was that it surpassed the 7th game of the World Series and the final game of the NBA championships. And then the following year, it surpassed the viewership of the Super Bowl. So we're talking pretty crazy numbers.
Catherine put in the chat that the esports club at Harvard is their largest club. So it's
right.
already taking over everywhere.
Absolutely. So I mean, basically it's just huge. Now this is the part that we really love to spend a lot of time on. And there's a lot about this, in the book as well. The careers, and I think it said it on the slide before, and Chris always refers to the fact that there's some large number, I want to say 40 or something, but there's something like 40 people, behind every one professional esport athlete, just like in the NFL. Like there are a number of people that are on the field, but think of all the jobs that are created around that. And what happens is a lot of these people, are big fans and want to be in the ecosystem or around, the gaming, so this creates opportunities for them, and we can start that in school in terms of content creation, video production. It's really neat to see kids get into that. We talked about shoutcasting, and that fits into that as well. So you're talking about, you could have a whole team around shoutcasting. If you ever get a chance, check out the work that Chris Haskell does at Boise State University in terms of production around his events. I mean, it's absolutely amazing to see the behind the scenes, and there are certainly some videos and at some presentations he's shown like a full behind the scenes, and it's pretty impressive.
The piece, I don't remember if we talk about this in the book or if just Chris talks about it every time we're presenting, but it's Chris Haskell. One of the stories he told us as we were doing the book was, there's a lot being made about scholarships and the availability of scholarships for esports, how scholarships are not going to gamers. They are, but scholarships are going to content producers, all of these different people. And he gave a scholarship right around the time we interviewed him for the book to a journalism student who was going to be writing esports stories about, about the team. And actually, if you follow his Facebook feed, and he's always putting up the Boise State feed. I mean, it is it's like you're watching ESPN, except These are college kids that are doing this professional stream. They're wearing suits. I mean, it is amazing. And those kids may be a critical part of the team and never play a game.
Right. And again, so we should be starting that as part of our programs, in the middle and high school level. Event management. One cool thing I know, we love to reference Chris, but Chris also is, very big on entrepreneurship, and he had a group of his students chose to run as one of their entrepreneurial events, a Fortnite tournament out in the community, and it was a huge success. And they're again, they're not the ones playing, they're the ones managing the event itself. And all of these other areas, I mean, clearly game design and all that. So yeah, this kind of sums it up, and this is a nice quote by us at Garden State Esports, that gaming itself is fun, but there is more to esports and education than competition, and that is,
There's nothing like quoting yourself in the.
Yeah, well, I think Chris said it, so I can quote it more easily. But I mean, nothing, truer words have not been spoken. And so also some of the things that we really love about it is from the inclusive standpoint, accessibility. Kids, both Chris and I have a lot of experience, and again, a lot of this happens without you realizing it's going to happen. But a large part of our clubs happen to be kids with from diverse backgrounds, but also with diverse needs. It amazes me to see kids come together socially in this environment that are the kids that often are not finding that, we call it the homeschool connection. And I've had some great experiences where I'd have a parent email me and say, my son or daughter's loving esports. We've been really trying to help them build social connections outside of school. Can you let me know who they're hanging out with in game club? Because they keep coming home talking about game club. They're excited to go all the time, but they're, I want to help them now foster those relationships outside of school. Yeah. So SEL, I think Chris is going to talk a little more at length about that, because there's a whole curriculum around that his team put together. But, these are just some of the key points around that. The improved sense of belonging. I mean, I've seen that over and over and over again. And that's tremendous, again, for especially these kids that might otherwise not have found that place in school. And we'll talk about more about like the health and wellness.
We have stories in the book too of where practitioners have basically shared stories from their own school districts about students who are completely disconnected from the school community and found their place because of esports. They didn't have that traditional sports background that, and didn't really have a safe space in the school, and esports has become that for many people.
And I've seen, like, I had one kid in particular who, it was like quietest kid, and he just was great at every game we ended up like playing or competing in. And all of a sudden you see this level of respect for him and self-confidence grow, and it's just awesome to see. Digital sportsmanship. So these are some huge topics here that we really like to address as well. We talk a lot about navigating digital culture. The idea here is esports, has been plagued, or gaming has been plagued with some challenges, no doubt about it, right? But the way I like to think about this is that I would far prefer to work directly with our students and support them in an authentic environment, to navigate, this sort of community. Where I think we have failed in the past is that we're afraid of addressing some of these real issues. But the reality is kids are playing games at home. They're online at home. They're encountering these things at home without really the support, right? They're kind of doing it a lot of times unsupervised and in isolation. We have an opportunity and an obligation, I feel, to work with kids, to address problems, to teach kids appropriate conduct. And one of the nice things that happens in at least scholastic esports is that we have very clear guidelines about behavior and things, right? And we can have consequences about that. So in that environment, kids are learning the way that what's expected, right? Just like they would in Little League or on their other sports teams and whatnot. But one of our big goals is, I think, to think that the more we bring this into the school and we guide kids in these ways, the more possibility and opportunity we have to even make an impact on the overall, gaming culture. But at the very least, at least we're helping kids figure out how to handle these situations. These skills, it's funny. We talk about this a lot. So part of me wants to say, these are so obvious or they're clear or whatever. But the reality is maybe not to everybody until you see it. But the strategy and critical thinking and situational awareness, communication is absolutely, I've seen. And again, what's so interesting about this to me is communication and collaboration, and talking while gaming, to do that with your team is crucial to your success. And we've had coaches work with our kids on that aspect. And again, because of some of the kids that I've seen in our programs, I mean, kids, on the spectrum and such that are not, known for their communication skills, let's say, that are learning that. And I've seen, like, our team at the high school, our Overwatch team, I saw them from the beginning of the season to the end of the season. And when I saw them in the finals, they actually made it to the NASEF national finals. Hearing them, it was the most, I mean, I was like, it was like a mind-blowing moment. Like, I heard them communicating, knowing who was calling plays, all these things that, that came from practice and all. So amazing. And the analysis and reflection part, we're talking about kind of like in a football situation where after a game, you go back and watch the videos and analyze them and that kind of thing.
So, yeah. So really quickly, I know we talked a little bit now about why. I think what we want to do, I'm sure you're wondering, so what does that look like to get a program started? So Chris is going to walk us through some pieces of the implementation of an esports program.
So really, it's not as hard as you think to get an esports team approved. The hardest part for me, what took 7 years, was convincing people of the value, right? And so what you want to make sure that you come to the table with is understanding, right, that value that Steve's been talking about. Especially now as part of Garden State Esports, when I talk to school districts, the last thing I talk about is the game. I talk about the social emotional learning that can be done through esports. I talk about the sense of belonging and safe, inclusive spaces that can be created on campus. I talk about the career and technical education side of things, where they can connect cross-curricular, hands-on learning opportunities with their esports teams. And very rarely do I even mention, the two biggest questions I get asked is, what do we play? And the answer to that, like I put in chat, is Rocket League. And what do we buy? And the answer to that I put in chat is, an i3 or better with a graphics card that's a 430 or better.
Now, Chris, there have been schools that have done this, though, even with makeshift, for school. This can be done with no budget, essentially.
Right. So through Garden State Esports, and even the league that we ran before we created Garden State Esports, it's like one of those things that, teachers have done so little, done so much with so little for so long that we can basically do anything with nothing. So I have models for esports teams, no matter what your budget is. And you would be surprised, right? Like anything else, you have to be clever. Overwatch accounts are currently on Donors Choose. PTAs have bought Xboxes. Their kids have brought in their own Xboxes. Their coaches have brought in their own Xboxes. One of the added benefits of having an esports team, is you also now have a new STEM lab, right? I have convinced a lot of districts to reallocate money from their sports travel budget and invest in a new STEM lab for the school that just magically transforms into the esports arena after hours, right? So no matter what the vision is, right, the real question is, what are your district goals? Because I promise you that esports can be aligned directly to those goals. That is really the biggest part of implementation, even though it sounds silly, is when you go to the table, right, pitching all the value adds and really not worrying so much about what the kids are playing. And once that part is understood by stakeholders, right, from there, it's really easy. Number one, you need an advisor. And one of the things we'll stress is the advisor does not have to be a gamer, right?
You should say that one more time, Chris, because I feel like everyone, that's the thing we always hear.
Right, and that's the, so it really doesn't have to be the gamer, because number one, there are, associations like Garden State Esports spread out around the country. There is the North American Scholastic Esports Federation, right? There is the Esports EDU community. If you look for the hashtags on social media, basically, if you know nothing about gaming, number one, the kids are going to teach you. Number two, right, there are plenty of excited educators, who are here to help. So please.
I just want to kind of piggyback on that really quickly. Yeah. So when we talked about starting a program in our district, the first roadblock that I hit with the Board of Education was, well, who's going to be the coach? Who knows enough about the games? And I said, and I just put it in the chat, you don't need to be a gamer to be a good coach. You need to be a good coach who's capable of learning about the ins and outs of the games, right? And it's just like we talk about being teachers, right? Can't teach a good teacher to be a good person, but you can teach a good person to be a good teacher. It's all the same concept, right? So that part is so important. And it was very satisfying when my middle school boys basketball coach turned around and said, I would like to give up basketball so I can be the esports coach.
Yeah.
And it was very eye-opening for our community because he wanted to serve those kids. And that was what it was really about.
And Chris, before you jump into the details, you said one other thing I just want to highlight for everyone, which is that the kids know the games. And in many ways, by you being the facilitator and overseeing, you're giving them an opportunity to lead through their knowledge of the games themselves.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, there are so many ways to do this. You know, as diverse ways as there are diverse kids and districts and stuff like that. And I'm even just thinking, you know, listening to you guys now, just the calls I've had this week, I literally got off the phone a couple hours ago with the former head coach of a big time football program here in New Jersey who stepped down to coach the esports team because that was his big connection to his son. And then he wanted to do that for his son. But, you know, it comes down to, and I'll tell you, right, with Garden State Esports, we are closing in on 100 school districts, right? We're up to like 87 or something like that. It is almost literally half and half. Half of our coaches are people like me and Steve and Jesse who grew up playing video games and are comfortable, you know, maybe not good. I'm not good at a lot of the games that I play. But the other half are those teachers that the kids go to because they're like, oh my God, you're our favorite teacher in the school. We know that you would be here for us and let us do this thing. And then you set up a structure that works for you, right? Some advisors, right? That's why we call them advisors and not coaches. Some advisors empower the most talented kids on the team to be the coaches. Some of the advisors realize that the most talented kid on the team doesn't make a great coach and takes the most empathetic and thoughtful kids and turns them into the coaches. I do a lot of connecting with colleges in New Jersey and making a pipeline between you know, middle school kids, high school kids, and then college esports players. And the college kids will coach the high school kids, and then the high school kids turn around and go coach the middle school kids. You know, and again, right now, this is all virtual just because of COVID, right? So it even gets better when we're doing this stuff in person. So understanding that you have to identify an advisor, but an advisor doesn't have to be anything except excited. Everything else can be taught, everything else, you know, it's really not, I promise you, it's not that hard. You just need to find somebody brave enough. After that, right, holding an interest meeting for students and laying out, right, the specifics of your club. I know for me, right, like Steve mentioned, I came from a very competitive approach where I told my kids we had mandatory practices. Through Garden State Esports, we're implementing seasons that mirror the athletic seasons here in New Jersey because our schools are actually all signing on to get varsity letters. But, you know, once you lay out the vision for your club with students or lay out that vision with students and let them, you know, help you build this program, it's really then just getting your student leadership squared away. And I'll tell you, you know, from what we're seeing, every club that I have interacted with, both in New Jersey and beyond, is currently approving this as a year-long club with a club advisor stipend. There are very, very few schools that have this flying under athletics. Hopefully one day that'll change. But that's kind of how this is all being done. And then last but not least, I would say the forgotten piece of the puzzle is often the IT department. If they are mad at you, don't like what you're doing, if they have questions and you don't give them enough lead time to get things in order, it is impossible to have a successful esports club without having a great relationship with your IT department, just because they are the ones that could easily stop this if they wanted to, based on, you know, a number of things that they believe, which may be fact or most of the time is fiction.
We actually spend one whole chapter of the book talking about who you need to talk to in your school district beyond the IT department, because I think we've all been in situations, the four of us, where we've started an initiative in our school and then forgot to loop in facilities or tech or custodian or anybody. And so we laid all of that out for you guys. So we're living there.
But once you have all your stakeholders on board, I'm sorry, Christine, you said.
No, I just wanted to say, just before you move on to like the fees too, reimagining how you're using existing equipment is such an important key to this as well. We had brought in an STEAM lab into our building 2 years before we even considered esports, and we had brought in some really high-end gaming PCs to run VR equipment off of, not thinking we could use those same exact machines to start our esports program. So having that sort of creative thought process of how can I repurpose or multi-use what I already have is such a great way to financially sell a program to, you know, your business people in your districts.
Yeah, I mean, and that's exactly that middle note there is identify hardware, IT concerns, what could be used, repurposed, upgraded, put a new video card in, figure out how you're going to get the Xbox Live hooked up to the internet and all that good stuff. Create the communication channels, especially in the time of COVID, right? For us, that's the one thing that has never stopped since March is esports practice and matches. So my kids and I, we asynchronously communicate through Google Classroom. My team has a Google Classroom. We have our practices on Zoom where the kids are over here and in front of me the game, and I'm bouncing back and forth. I put them in breakout rooms by team. And then the biggest one is ally yourself with organizations that are student first, right? That will provide you competition support and resources. Obviously, if you're in New Jersey, Garden State Esports is here for you. I know most of you guys are in California and it works out. So is NASIF, the North American Scholastic Esports Federation. They're the only nonprofit doing work on a national scale. And I will leave with this very brief warning because I tend to get fired up at this part. Please very much consider, right, not going with a for-profit. There have been a lot of problems and a lot of continuing situations with these for-profits monetizing students. And there are organizations, and I'll drop the link when I go grab it, in and around your state, especially California, who can help you. And if you can't find somebody, NASIF will help you. So please make sure you are very careful and do your homework with who you ally yourself with. You do not need anyone or anything special to do this. And anyone who promises you some turnkey solution to esports at your school is just trying to take your money.
Chris, and actually speaking of that, so you just spoke, you mentioned Garden State Esports a few times in some of the work that you've been doing and what you can do. So actually, I just moved us ahead to here.
Sure.
And actually, this is breaking news, but I just received the email that we're a go. So like districts are actually bringing in now Garden State Esports to do some exciting work. So why don't you talk about that a little bit, Chris?
Yeah. So one of the reasons I started Garden State Esports was to make sure this is done correctly. Because like I said, I have a big issue with a lot of for-profits and the way that they're handling things. But most of all, right, who better to lead the scholastic movement than educators? We know what needs to be done. We know how to do it. We have the relationships with the students. And so some of the areas my team and I have been focusing on, and I have a team now approaching 14 all educators. We have something that we call the EPIC curriculum, which is the esports personal and performance improvement curriculum. That is our big time SEL curriculum that we are launching in March. We've been working with some of the biggest names in SEL, Castle, SEL4MJ, if you're familiar with how, the work that they're doing. We just signed some stuff with Rutgers to do some research around some of the cutting edge things we're doing in bystander intervention training in esports, so we can empower kids to defend the safe spaces that we're building. Like Steve mentioned earlier, we're doing some cutting edge stuff around basically what comes down to digital citizenship on steroids, where these kids know, especially in the esports team, not to give out their name and address on the internet. But what about these places and situations where these kids are finding them because they're being left alone on the internet and they don't know how to handle it and they don't know what to do? So the EPIC curriculum is our SEL curriculum. I just looked at that email. My team and I have started to take on districts nationally and helping them make sure that their esports program is, doing what's best for students, especially at the time of COVID. I don't know about California, but in New Jersey, the entire road back that the New Jersey Department of Education released was all about social emotional learning. I mean, you could not ask for a better platform than esports when it comes to SEL. So you can see some of the stuff that we're working on there. Our partners, we partner with the Army academically. They help us with our resiliency training and teamwork and communication skills. We talk about diet, sleep, and exercise, how to set up your station to make sure that you avoid esports injuries. My kids' minds were blown that when we started practicing that we actually will stretch and do calisthenics before we start playing. We do mindfulness activities like breathing, or what I call, green light, yellow light, red light is self-regulating, so you're not throwing the controller and losing your mind. And then really one thing I encourage you, and I'll try to grab the link before we get out of here. There was a great article, and I can't remember, it was actually a video, I can't remember who put it out, but it was one of the major newspapers where they identified different emblems and symbols from the Capitol riots. And you would be alarmed at how many of these emblems can be traced back to or associated with either places on the internet or gaming groups within the internet. And so dismantling hate speech and toxicity, knowing that kids are being targeted sometimes through games and places like Reddit and 4chan and 9gag by groups, in the alt-right and beyond. That's why we call it digital citizenship on steroids. I've been in a situation where I've been alerted to a student who's going to commit an act of violence against a student of color because he had been recruited by the alt-right. This student was autistic and was not able to identify the fact that these people weren't really his friends. And when they, found out because he triggered our filters at school, they went down to guidance, and he was talking about things that these, the counselors and beyond had never heard of. The men's right movement and being incel and all these different things. And so knowing that there is at times a dark place on the internet that we need to make sure that we're educating students about and letting them know when it's time to contact a trusted adult, right? We do a lot with trusted adults, and that that esports advisor or esports coach is to a lot of these kids. Because some of these kids don't have a homeschool connection. They just go home after school and play video games, right? But we're bringing them all together and we're building a community. And at the center of the community is a trusted adult, which can make a difference in a student's life. So we have coaching resources, we have technical education resources, how to build a team behind the team and all that good stuff. So this rabbit hole of esports goes a lot deeper than playing video games. And I'm hoping that's one thing that you guys take away is it's actually way easier to get started, but it's a lot harder to do this right. And so please ally yourselves with people like Steve and Christine and Jesse and Nasif, your local nonprofit, state organizations and stuff like that, who are going to help you make sure you do this right.
We only have a couple minutes left. I know we wanted to leave time for QA. So Christine, do you just want to tell us quickly, again, we talked about the book in terms of the fact that we don't really get to the games themselves until the last part, but what would someone who picked up the book expect?
Can you guys hear me okay? Because everybody else is frozen.
Oh, yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So the 2-second overview of the book is basically everything we just talked about, but broken down for you so that you can explain everything to your district and get your programs up and running. It's a how-to, it's a why-to, it's a when-to, it's a how-to together, where your support systems come from. And I'm getting the private message that we're out of time. So that's my 30-second overview of the book.
There's a link in the chat for the promo for this conference. If you buy the book on Amazon and just put your receipt in through the form that's there, we will send you some free additional resources. And just the last thing I'll say is what Chris and I were referencing before is Ready Learner One and Garden State Esports has partnered to bring services specifically designed to improve schools' esports programs. That includes working with you to design curriculum for courses. That's what I was referring to before. We're actually doing that for a school district. And also some consulting. If you have questions, you can contact us at info@readylearner.one and we can explain that a little more to you.
Okay, thank you so much for being here. On behalf of California School Library Association and Digit Summit Institute, huge gratitude. All of this is fabulous. And just so you guys know, like the guys on the panel, We were talking a little bit and decided you're going to come back and we're going to spend maybe like a half day, do some learning and then do some gaming. So we're scheduling that. Okay. Is that good?
We love it.
Okay. Perfect.
I will set up
Thank you,
the
Nora, for
Fortnite
holding up the
tournament.
book.
Yeah. If all of you want to unmute for a moment and share your gratitude, that's totally fine.
I'll share mine. Thank you all for being such a great audience.
Thank you.
I played Among Us with Steve, and I don't think I want to do it again.
I love it. I
Just
love that game.
Anybody want to play
Steve
Duck Hunt? No.
Is the most sus I know.
Come
He's
on
very
now.
sus.
Super sus.
Thank
That's
you,
all.
guys.
I'm always the
Fabulous.
imposter.
We'll come together. We should do a big Fortnite with our creator code. you
Yes.
know? We got Mr. Epic with us. I mean, that'd be a great day of learning and gaming.
Ooh, can we call him that from now on? I love that.
Mr. Epic. I've been calling him that for weeks. He doesn't know, but
And if you want to jump in and see, Pass the Scope is doing their review of the day right now. It's in progress. You can click on it instead and join in. It's on Twitter, all of that. Hashtag Pass the Scope EDU is a great way to connect with them. Super appreciative for them amplifying everything that we're doing here. Thank you again.
Could you drop that in the chat?
Okay, it's yes.
Thanks. That was a lot.
I have dogs.
Oh, dogs, bad dogs. Thank you so much. That was
Thanks,
really awesome.
everyone.
And that's what happens when someone knocks on my door. Thank you again. Enjoy.
I just want to say thank you so much, and I learned a lot. And I just bought your book. This
Thank you.
I personally don't like. I personally not that I don't like, but I'm not a gamer. But I see how invested the kids are
Mhm.
in it, and I want to encourage that, like you said, to build a
Thanks.
community and for them to have a safe place to
The
go.
best part is you don't have to be a gamer, and they'll appreciate just the fact that you're meeting them where they are.
Yeah. And Yatina, once you start reading the book, if you want to talk about being a non-gamer trying to navigate esports, reach out to me because I can share my journey and we can talk and collaborate.
Awesome. I added you on Twitter, so I will be reaching out.
Awesome. I look forward to it.
Thank you.